Hey everybody, welcome to the technically it's the third episode, but today we're going to be starting the second unit of Psych Review. Today is April 14th, I think. Tomorrow is going to be April 15th. I've been up late a lot, and so days are just confusing to me right now. But yeah, the test is in less than a month, and I'm still reviewing chapter 2. So I need to get my butt moving. So yeah, let's get started. So unit 2 is about the body and the mind. So we'll begin with the nervous system. Neurons are nerve cells, which is the basic building block of the nervous system. The soma is the cell body. It maintains the health of the neuron. And the dendrites receive messages. The axon is the little tube thing that passes messages away from the cell body. And let me just give you a description of what the diagram might look like. So the soma is sort of a round little dude, and he's got some branching arms. Then there's a tube going to the right of the branching arms, and that tube is called the axon. And then at the end of the axon are some more branching arms that don't have a nucleus. So you can tell the difference between the soma and the dendrites because the soma has a nucleus in it, the dendrites do not. And around the axon is the myelin sheath, which is a kind of fatty acid type. It's not fatty acids, but it's made of certain kinds of fats, and so it protects the electronic signal going from the soma to the dendrites and helps it go faster. It's like an insulator. Fun fact, people who are malnourished or have anorexia lose the fat in their bodies, therefore their myelin sheath can sometimes get thin or disappear, and then that makes it harder for them to think quickly. It's not really a fun fact, it's just fact. And then the action potential is the neural impulse or brief electrical charge that travels down the axon. The sodium-potassium pump is the mechanism by which ions are allowed to pass through the membrane of the neural cell. There are two primary elements present in ion exchange. The pump brings positively charged ions into cells and then pumps them out when the action potential is over. All or none response. The neuron fires or it doesn't. There is no in between. The threshold, the level of stimulation required to trigger an impulse. The refractory period is the period of inactivity after a neuron has fired. Here I have the myelin sheath covers the axon. It makes the neural connection more efficient. The axon terminals are the endpoint of a neuron where the neurotransmitters are stored. They're called terminal buttons, terminal branches, end buttons, synaptic knobs. Connects with dendrites of next neuron. Yes. Communication between neurons. Synapse is where the axon terminals and dendrites meet. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that travel from one neuron to the next. They cross the synaptic gaps between neurons and act differently depending on which part of the brain they act on. And let's talk about some types of neurotransmitters, because I've got them all written down over here on a different piece of paper. Alrighty, so acetylcholine, it contracts your muscles. It plays a role in learning and memory. It's a messenger at every junction between motor neurons and skeletal muscles. And some malfunctions that can happen, like when acetylcholine doesn't work, if there's too much acetylcholine, you can have paralyzation, Alzheimer's, memory loss, Saliva, excess saliva, I guess, and blurry vision. Dopamine influences movement, learning, attention, and emotion. Too much dopamine can cause schizophrenia, and not enough dopamine can cause tremors, decreased mobility, and Parkinson's disease. Serotonin affects mood, hunger, sleep, and arousal. Not enough serotonin can cause depression, but too much serotonin can cause seizures, fever, and muscle malfunction. Norepinephrine helps control alertness and arousal. It connects brain and body for actions. Not enough norepinephrine can cause depressed mood. GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid, is a major inhibitory neurotransmitter. If you don't have enough of it, you have seizures, tremors, and insomnia. Glutamate, which can be found in tomato, cheese, and mushrooms, is a major excitatory neurotransmitter. It's involved in memory, the most abundant excitatory in vertebrate system. Too much of it can cause migraines and seizures, but not enough can cause insomnia, concentration problems, mental exhaustion, and mental exhaustion. Avoid MSG, and it's related to Alzheimer's and epilepsy. I'm not sure what MSG is, but endorphins. They help explain good. They helps explain good feelings through different activities. Not enough endorphins can cause disgust. Okay, and now we're going to talk about the nervous system. The central nervous system is your brain and your spinal cord, and that pretty much the brain sends instructions and then they travel through the spinal cord to the rest of the body. The spinal cord can produce directions on its own, but it doesn't do that very often. Sometimes it does. It happens actually when you're in the womb before you're born and your brain isn't fully developed, then a lot of messages are actually sent just through the spinal cord. Fun fact. The peripheral nervous system connects the central nervous system to the rest of the body. So the messages come, like, your brain sends the message and then it comes out of your brain into your spine and then to the rest of your body. The afferent or sensory neurons take information from senses to the brain. So the information that you are touching something and it's soft, you touch the thing, feel the softness, you touch the thing, and a message goes to your brain, then your brain tells you that it's soft. The interneurons take messages from the brain and spinal cord and send them elsewhere in the brain to different neurons. And then, to efferent neurons. And let me read that again. Interneurons take messages from the brain and spinal cord and sends them elsewhere in the body or to efferent neurons. Efferent or motor neurons take information from the brain to the rest of the body. So it's kind of like the difference between a vein and an artery, where a vein takes blood towards the heart or one of them takes blood towards the heart and one of them takes blood away from the heart. And I don't actually know which one is which, but here we know that afferent neurons take information from your hands or from your senses to the brain. And then the interneurons take the messages and send them away. And then the efferent neurons take information from the brain to the rest of the body. Peripheral nervous system contains a bunch of different kinds of systems within it. So the somatic system controls voluntary movements, like movements that you are thinking about doing. So a voluntary movement would be like poking yourself in the face, picking your nose, bending your finger. That's a voluntary movement. The autonomic nervous system controls self-regulated action of internal organs and glands. So, Yeah, the autonomic nervous system controls involuntary movements like breathing, digestion, your heartbeat. And then within the autonomic nervous system, there's two different kinds. There's sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The parasympathetic response, the sympathetic response causes arousal and it produces energy. So a sympathetic response would be your foot slips on the stair and you get filled with adrenaline. That's a sympathetic response. A parasympathetic response is a calming or conserving energy response. So the parasympathetic response is going to be to like drinking tea and then you're like, yeah, you feel calm again. Alrighty, I'm switching to a different notebook now. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm switching to the back of this notebook because I wrote the rest of the notes in here so I can actually read them because I'm cool like that. I can't read my own handwriting sometimes. So, chapter 2, continuing. Now we're going to be talking about some parts of the places where hormones are manufactured within the endocrine system. So, the pituitary gland regulates growth and controls other endocrine glands. The hypothalamus is the region of the brain that controls the pituitary gland. The thyroid gland affects metabolism. The parathyroids help regulate the level of calcium in the blood. The adrenal glands help trigger the fight or flight response. And the pancreas regulates the level of sugar in the blood. The testes and ovaries secrete male or female hormones like testosterone and estrogen. Where am I right now? Oh. Okay, then we have some types of brain scans. So, an electroencephalogram, or an EEG, is an amplified reading of the waves of electrical activity sweeping across the brain's surface. Computed tomography, a CT scan, is a series of X-ray photos taken from different angles and combined by a computer into a composite representation of a slice of brain structure. The position emission tomography scan, or PET scan, is a visual display of brain activity that detects where a radioactive form of glucose goes while the brain performs a given task. Magnetic resonance imaging, or the MRI, uses magnetic fields and radio waves to produce CGI of soft tissue brain anatomy. And the functional MRI, or fMRI, reveals blood flow and brain activity. Okay. Then there is some more here that I, for some reason, didn't write down. But it's because I'm not super sure if I put it into my notes correctly. So, I know that this one I did. So, let's just check that. The motor cortex part of the brain, which is kind of where if you put a headband on, like a headband being the kind that puts the bangs out of your face, that is where it would be, and it is the motor cortex which controls voluntary movement. And the somatosensory cortex is right behind it, another strip that kind of looks like that. It registers and processes body touch and movement sensations. The frontal lobe is basically the front part of your brain, kind of above your eye area, and that control is involved in speaking and muscle movement, making plans, and adjustments. The auditory cortex, which is, kind of by your ears, is important for hearing. Some of this is not super correct. the occipital lobe is kind of at the back of your head and kind of at the bottom of it. And that the occipital lobe is the area that receives information from visual fields, and just above it is the visual cortex that transmits out what you're seeing. And then the temporal and parietal lobes are kind of in between the somatosensory cortex, the visual cortex, and the auditory cortex. And one of them receives sensory input for touch and body position, but I'm not sure which one it is because of this diagram thing. Split brain research helps us understand the functions of our two brain hemispheres because being able to see the parts functioning separately helps us understand how they work individually and together. Genes are DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid. I probably didn't say that right. And behavior geneticists explain our individual differences because we have different combinations of DNA. Twins tell us that genetics has more to do with your psychology than environment. And an evolutionary psychologist might explain gender differences in sexuality and mating preferences based on procreation preferences within the sexes. I'm going to see if I can try and figure out how this diagram over here was supposed to work because it was confusing. Ooh, okay, so the cerebral cortex is the thin layer of brain matter that covers the entire outside of your brain. And what I have here is that it is the ultimate control and information processing center. Let's see, we have the amygdala, which it directs eating, drinking, body temperature, and is linked to emotion and reward, but I'm not sure if that's correct. Sorry about that long, awkward pause. I really need to go into the book and figure out the actual parts of the brain. So I'm going to do that in a minute, but not right now. So I hope that was informative for you.